So as an example, here's something about how characters are balanced. Did you know that League of Legends players are thirsty for blood? Most of you are bloodthirsty maniacs, especially top laners. And so the optimal way to play League of Legends is not fight people a lot of the time. It's not always the case, but very often in League of Legends, you should like look at fights and be like, I'm not taking that. I'm not taking that. Oh, that one? Nope, just chilling. Oh, the jungler could be anywhere. I'm not taking that. But the reality is that the 99% of League of Legends players don't play like that. And then, you know, maybe some challenger players do. But that's actually really important because it means the experience for the average player in League of Legends all the way up to Master Tier is very aggressive and fighty. Whereas, like, the experience in Master Tier might not be, depending on the server and depending on what champions people are picking. And so there's, like, a very, very big difference in the ways that, like, the best players play the game when it's fully optimized out versus the majority of players and how they play the game. Because the majority of players are going to be doing things that they think are fun, even if it's not optimal. And one of the most fun things you can do in League of Legends is fight your opponent. And so there's a lot of players who will pick characters who are good when fighting opponents and then go fight their opponents, even though if they were in a challenger game, that would be like completely incorrect to do. And it's an interesting like observation about how the game plays out, and how actually the game changes pretty drastically when you're in higher Mars, where the game is more optimized and everybody knows exactly what they should be doing, which is often to play safer. But so when I talk about things like Kayle being really, really good, generally when I'm talking about things like that, it's for the vast majority of players. It is not necessarily true that Kayle is a god tier character in like challenger. She's just straight up isn't, by the way. But like even late game, like yeah, at that point there might be some other characters who are better. But like if you're playing solo queue where everything is sloppy and all the way up to diamond nobody plays perfectly, then characters that just provide like some guaranteed value to their team tend to be like way more powerful than you think. Yeah. You said there are people who are paid to play a champion to perfection. Can you give an example of the champs? I mean, AZIR is one of these, right? Pro players are paid to play champions really, really well, right? And if you're a god at certain champions, you're going to be able to like translate that to pro play. There's certain like pro skewed champions that every pro should be good at, right? Like if you're a mid laner in pro, you probably want to be really good at AZIR, as an example. It's like a very important champion to have in your roster. And if you can play AZIR to perfection, it's a big deal, right? In jungle, Lee Sin is one that you always got to think of, right? If you're a Lee Sin god, that's pretty important. That's a pretty valuable champion to have in your roster. Bot lane, it's characters like ZERI and APHELIOS and LUCIAN, right? There's a lot of like these like, if you play them perfectly characters, you're gonna get a lot of value out of them from a high level standpoint. So I'd say like if you're talking about like what kind of characters people, it's worth learning them to perfection, it is often the characters who are a combination of hard to play and incredibly powerful and mastered. Usually meaning that their ability to play as outstrips their counterplay. Meaning that like if you're a god at this character, even if you're playing against an equally good player, every mastery point you have in this character will reduce their ability to win against you. A historic example of this, which is less true nowadays, is AKALI. When AKALI came out, she was very, very powerful, especially in the hands of pros. And one of the reasons that she was so hard to balance was that the better you got at AKALI, the worse your opponents got. Meaning that like if you went against equal skill players, but you were an AKALI god, you'd just be at an extreme advantage. Where generally with characters, even if you get good at them, they tend to have weaknesses that anyone can exploit. So as an example of this is YASUO. YASUO is a character who extreme rewards for mastery. If you're a YASUO god, you will legitimately win way more games and be very successful. But one of the reasons that like YASUO isn't like in pro all the time is that he has like core weaknesses that cannot be gotten around. Like as an example, getting ganked. YASUO does not have a lot of options during the laning phase for the jungle interference. He's just doesn't have that power to really get out of a gank. Compare that to like ZERI, where if someone tries to gank ZERI, she skates over a wall and like types in chat, like lol in chat while doing it, right? And so that's an example of like Yasuo can't deal with getting ganked. ZERI, from a high level perspective especially, tends to always be able to deal with getting ganked. So that's a big difference, where the better you get at ZERI, the less gankable you become, whereas the better you get at YASUO, you're always going to be gankable, which means that's an exploitable weakness that the best players can play around if you lock in YASUO. So, yeah, that's kind of the idea there, is a combination of you getting really good at a character makes you good at it, and a combination of and you getting really good at a character makes opponents have a much harder time playing against it. Whereas like the extreme end of this on the other end is like, it doesn't matter how good you get at say like it doesn't matter how good you get at like say Sona, your ability to impact the game is capped. Like that's just how it's going to go, and your opponent's ability to outplay you kind of stays consistent all the time. So yeah, Desperate Nasus. I think being gankable or not also depends on your playstyle and awareness. Yes, but if we're talking about the highest level of play, we have to assume that their playstyle and awareness is top tier, right? It's not always the case. Basically, the highest level of play, you're always like playing around and understanding a lot better if you can get ganked or not. So yeah, that does mean that Yasuo probably has an advantage at high levels in the fact that like he can play around getting ganked. But let's talk about that. So there's a Yasuo player, he's in Challenger, and he never gets ganked. Does that mean that he has transcended his weakness? Does that mean he's no longer weak to being ganked? I would argue no, and here's why. If a Yasuo Challenger player never gets ganked, he's probably playing around the fact that he could get ganked, which means he has to play way safer, and that's a disadvantage. If he has to play way safer, he can't push his leads, he can't take advantage of mistakes of his opponents, he can't all in, like he'll be playing safer. And so in a situation where Challenger Yasuo never gets ganked, yeah, that means he's really good at the game, but he's probably taken on costs to do it. He's had to like give up plays that might have resulted in kills. He's had to give up plays that might have resulted in value because he's playing around getting ganked in the way that like, if you were playing like a super safe character in mid that can just dash away, like say maybe an Ahri player at high levels, when she hits 6, can play a lot more aggressive, even if she knows she's going to get ganked because she can use her ult to get out, right? So that's kind of the example there. It's like, it's not that Yasuo players can't get good enough to not get ganked. It's that if you get good enough to not get ganked, it probably means your play style is taking cost elsewhere to do it. Not in the same way that like AZIR or Ahri would. I'm sorry about the Pantheon Q bug. I am not on like mainline League of Legends right now. I don't have time to fix those types of bugs. I hope we know about it, and I hope someone fixes it. But yeah, I'm working on a PvE mode right now, and I don't have time to fix the buggy bugs. Apologies. But hopefully it is known, and hopefully it will get fixed.